If you clicked on this video, you probably have a large unpainted grey army of miniatures that needs to be painted. Or perhaps a large backlog of unpainted Games Workshop miniatures that also need to be painted. Well, this video is about solving that problem by getting your Warhammer army tabletop ready. And when I say a whole army, I mean a whole army. There's over 72 guys here. So many miniatures to paint. And obviously I'll also be timing myself so you guys know how long it takes you to paint an entire Warhammer army yourself. And the technique I'm going to be showing you guys in this video works with any miniatures. It's fast, it's straightforward, but there's going to be a few pitfalls you'll want to avoid by watching this video. We're going to be rapidly speed painting this entire grey army to get them on the tabletop in a step-by-step beginner-friendly way that anyone can follow along with. And the method we're using is all about underpainting your miniatures in a fast and effective way. Now, this miniature painting method goes by many names these days, like underpainting, slapchop, or if you're an art historian or born in the 16th century, you may know it as grisage, which is a fine artist movement where they paint everything in grey. But to be honest with you, none of that really matters because this is just about getting your army tabletop ready in a fast and easy way. So let's do that. But first, let me know in the comments how many unpainted miniatures you have. Is it 10 guys? A whole box set? An army? Or 2? Then I'll pin the worst comment. Then we can all be like, well, at least I'm not that guy. Here's a quick summary about how this will work before I go into detail about each step and how to get the best results. Step 1. Undercoat your miniatures in black. Step 2. Dry brush your miniatures in dark grey. Step 3. Dry brush them light grey. And then we have step 4. Dry brush them white from the top going downwards. Then block in the colours using contrast paint or watered down acrylic paint to make the underpainting still visible. Now your miniatures are tabletop ready, but you could also add any additional highlights, transfers, glazes or washes to take the miniature further. But now I want to break down this whole method in detail. Step 1, we need to undercoat these miniatures in black. Now you can do this using either a paintbrush, an airbrush, or even my personal favorite, which is the spray can. I'm using the Games Workshop spray can, Chaos Black. So through the power of editing, and bam! Everything is instantly undercoated. I told you this method was fast. But next, we have the most important part, which is the dry brushing, which usually most people think is really simple. But honestly, this is the part where if you don't do it correctly, it can make or break how good your miniatures are actually going to look at the end of this process. So taking your time in this next step is really going to give you amazing results at the end. But by painting all of these miniatures black, we've lost a lot of the detail in them. So we need to bring that back. And to do this, we're going to come down here and discover the paint drawer. So all we need is a grey paint. This is Administratum Grey from Games Workshop. And as you can see, it is a lighter grey colour. What we should do instead of using this straight away is use a darker grey, like Mechanicus Standard Grey. And if we dry brush the miniature in this darker grey and then go to a lighter grey afterwards, we'll basically get like a sort of slow gradient from dark to light. We can then add on a white after that and we'll basically get this really nice slow gradient from dark to light. And I'll show you how to achieve that effectively in a moment. But you don't have to use Games Workshop. You could also use Army Painter. They also have grey paint, or alternatively you could use AK or Game Color, literally any grey paint to dry brush. So get your chosen dark grey and your wife's makeup brush. They're very soft bristles which lead to the ultimate soft dry brushing effect. I'll leave a link below if you need one. Secondly, and this may sound weird, but I'm actually going to teach you how to dry brush properly. Now normally when dry brushing, I see a lot of people recommend that you use kitchen roll in order to wipe off the paint from your brush. Now if you do this after loading your brush with paint, it's actually not a good thing, because what you're doing is, firstly, you're removing the paint pigments from your brush, which is good, but at the same time, because kitchen towel is so absorbent, you're removing the moisture as well. And what that leaves you with is a very chalky, sort of chunky finish to the miniature when you then apply that paint, and that's because the brush has no moisture in it. So instead of using this, make sure that you instead get a textured palette. You can even use like a chopping board or any textured surface. You're just going to put the paint onto the brush, and after you've got some paint paint on the brush, you're just going to want to work it into that surface. And that's not removing any moisture because it's a hard surface, so that moisture is still in the paint. And that is very important when you're dry brushing it. It really makes a massive difference. If you're ever wondering why your dry brushing looks textured almost, that's probably the reason.
These are the paints that I'm going to be using. Starting out with the dark grey, you're going to want to make sure the paint is mixed very well, and to do this I'm using a vortex shaker. I'll link it down below if you've never heard of it. It is the ultimate paint mixer. Then I'm going to grab a bit of my paint and put it onto the palette. And next I'm going to get my dry brush and rub it into the palette and into the bristles of the brush. We're going to want to wipe the paint into the surface until it looks like there's almost nothing left. Then you can start applying it onto your miniature. I recommend using a circular motion in order to hit all of the raised areas of the miniature. Since this is our darkest grey, you can even use it within the shadows and recesses of the miniature as well to add a bit of texture and interest. Really do take your time with this step to build up a soft gradient of dark grey. If you use too much paint, you'll end up with a very messy looking miniature. If we compare side by side the before and after, you can see all the textures and detail that we've brought out of the miniature already just with that one stage of dry brushing. But it is a very subtle transition from black to grey.
Okay, so I finally dry brushed every single miniature and I'm really happy with how they look so far. Next we need to go a grade lighter on the grey. So instead of Mechanica Standard Grey, we're going to go to Administratum Grey. Now if you wanted to skip a step, you could have just gone straight to this lighter grey and just dry brushed the miniatures, and then you basically would have just had the black dark tone, a mid tone, and then you'll go white after that so you have the highlights. But I wanted to add in that extra step just so you get a really slow transition between dark and light.
So take your lighter grey and repeat the same process, but this time when we come to actually dry brushing the miniature, we'll instead be focusing on the areas where the light would be hitting. We'll leave the areas that are under the arms in darkness to create the appearance of natural lighting on the miniature. By using dry brushing to touch the raised areas of muscles and fur, we can bring out all of that detail in a really easy way. You may also notice that the more detailed your miniature is, the more effective the dry brushing technique will actually be at creating interest. It instantly allows me to build up highlights because the surface is so textured. Side by side you can see the difference this lighter grey has created. But the fact that we already built up the dark tones with the darker grey, we've actually created a lot more depth to the miniature, as it transitions slowly from dark to light. Compared to the traditional Slapchop method, this obviously takes a bit longer to do, but the end results will be twice as good.
So now we finished that lighter grey undercoat, we next want to move to a white colour. Now we want to be very sparing with how much we actually put onto the miniature, only highlighting the top areas of the miniature to basically show this is where the light is hitting the miniature directly, and letting everything else sort of merge into the shadows.
Now the truth is that Citadel White is one of the worst whites in miniature painting. It has these clumpy bits in, so I'd recommend instead using another white if you can. But I'm not going to because I'm a fine cast goblin. This time we're going to dry brush the white with only downward strokes to replicate the light that is shining downwards onto the miniature. This is going to be by far the fastest step of this dry brushing process, since you only need to touch a few miniatures. As you can see, I'm hitting the chainmail from above to create the illusion of reflective metal shining in the sun. You're basically just hitting all these miniatures with a soft white dry brush from above to create this effect. Don't be afraid to leave the areas of shadow that you painted earlier, since this creates contrast that's going to make your tiny miniatures seem lifelike from a distance on the tabletop.
So with that final stage of the dry brushing completed, we have dry brushed and underpainted all of our miniatures. Now this final step only took me half an hour for all 72 of these miniatures, so about 30 seconds a miniature. It was a very quick and deliberate final step. So in total, we spent 2 minutes 30 on each miniature just dry brushing them, and they look fantastic. It's really created this incredible army effect. Like from a distance, from over there, you're looking at my army and they look three-dimensional. They look like they have areas of brightness and darkness, and that contrast really makes the 3D effect of these miniatures from a distance look like the lighting is realistic. And when you're playing with miniatures, you're not looking at them like this. You're not like, oh yeah, look at the detail on this miniature. You're playing with them from a distance. So when you paint an entire army, you want it to be fast, effective, but still make those miniatures look three-dimensional and exciting from a distance. And I feel like this dry brushing technique really achieves that.
And if we take a look closer up, we can see the areas of light and shadow and how they create a dramatically lit effect on the model, with the areas under the arm becoming this dark, shadowy recess versus the much more highlighted face. At the next stage, we'll be adding colour onto the miniature, and the areas of light and dark will show through, creating this incredibly striking appearance. But thanks to this method, you'll notice that you're drawn towards the brightness of the face, and that means we can focus all our times, efforts and attention on the brightest areas to save even more time, since nobody is going to be bothering to look at the shadowy recesses.
But obviously the next step from here is to actually add colour onto the miniatures. And to do that, we need to talk about contrast paint. So contrast paint is basically designed to be applied to your miniature after you give it a base coat. And then you just wash the entire miniature with contrast paint. But instead of doing that, we're going to be watering down the contrast paint, sometimes to the consistency of a Games Workshop shade, and then we're going to be applying that to our model. And because that paint is going to be watered down, you're going to be able to see through it to the detail we've underpainted below.
So I'm starting out with 2 brown contrast paints, and all I'm going to be doing is blocking in the areas of leather and cloth on the miniature, while leaving the face, hands and hair, which are going to be different colours, unpainted, because we'll be using a different contrast paint for those. Next, I'm going to be watering down some rat skin flesh base paint for the skin on this miniature. It's always better to thin down the paints too much and do a couple of layers to increase the saturation, instead of just doing one big blocky layer and literally covering up all of the shadows you built up from the underpainting. Now, all contrast paints are different. Some are going to be thicker than others and require some thinning down, others are going to be too translucent and require a couple of thin coats to get the desired effect on a miniature. So just block in all the areas of colour on the miniature with thin enough paint that the underpainting still comes through beneath it. It is really simple and straightforward, and honestly very fast to do. The trick is to stay within the lines of what you're painting, and if you do happen to make any mistakes, don't worry, you can just paint over the miniature again, but it will obviously take you longer, so it pays off to take your time here. In the case of the chainmail, I left it unpainted, but if I wanted to, I could add some metallic paint onto the helmet, weapons and chainmail, but for the sake of speed, I've chosen not to. And also this way it looks like non-metallic metal with absolutely no effort required by me. And if you also took your time to make smooth dry brush transitions, both your brown horses and your black horses and any other color horse you want to make are going to look really good using this dry brushing technique.
So here we are. The army is now tabletop ready. We could take it to a tournament, or if we like, we could even go a step further by adding highlights, glazes, washes, or whatever else we wanted to do to take it to the next level. But we don't need to. And to be honest, you're probably wondering how long it took me to get to this point. But to be honest with you, there are 4 things you need to know before you try this method out for yourself. Firstly, time. I spent about 5 minutes per miniature blocking in all the colors. So 6 hours to block in the colors of a whole army. So in total, in that whole process, we spent 7 minutes 30 seconds painting each miniature, from dry brushing through to coloring them in. I mean, you could easily spend longer or probably go faster if you wanted to. Secondly, yes, you could paint your entire army in a weekend using this method, but it's gonna destroy you. You're probably gonna burn out. So I recommend, instead of doing an army production line, that you instead focus on doing 10 miniatures a session. That way you'll at least be finishing 10 miniatures each session. Painting an entire army at once, however, is one of the reasons a lot of people just never want to pick up a paintbrush again. But now we've painted all of these miniatures, we have another problem. The third problem. We need to base everything. Currently, I've actually deliberately not based them because I want you guys to decide the basing scheme. These are Dunlending soldiers from Lord of the Rings. They come from the mountains, so I was thinking kind of like a grassy tundra or a mountainous snowy terrain. But let me know any ideas you have in the comments section and we'll do that. But we also have the fourth, issue. We've got a massive army here. We need to transport it. How are we going to do that? Well, don't worry, there's a secret hack just here that Games Workshop doesn't want you to know about. The most affordable way to transport your army across the battlefield.